A year has passed since the storm, and my lakeside cabin sits peacefully in the morning mist. I'm sipping coffee on my deck, watching the glass-smooth water reflect the early sunlight. The HOA has a new president now, a gentleman named Robert, who actually asks residents what they think before making decisions. Nobody talks about Linda Morrison anymore, the woman with the wild blonde curls and that signature red HOA polo shirt. It's like she never existed. But I remember everything. How could I forget the woman who tried to destroy my life? I've been thinking about it a lot lately, wondering if there was another way things could have ended. The truth is, I never wanted it to go as far as it did. I just wanted to live peacefully in the home I'd owned for 10 years. Sometimes I wonder if Linda ever thinks about what happened, wherever she is now. That's when little Emma from down the street comes running up to my deck, her pigtails bouncing. "Mr. Jake," she calls out, completely out of breath. "My mom says you own this whole lake, and the parking lot too. Is that really true?" I nearly drop my coffee mug. Who told her that? She says today is the anniversary of when you turned the tables, but I don't understand what that means. Can you tell me the story? I stare down at the property deed in my desk drawer, the document that changed everything, the one I never thought I'd need to use. Looking at Emma's curious face, I realize maybe it's time to tell the whole story. Maybe it's time to go back to where it all began, when a simple noise complaint turned into an all-out war. "Well, Emma," I say, settling back in my chair, "let me tell you about the woman who thought she could kick me out of my own home." It started on a Tuesday morning in early spring, exactly 13 months ago. I opened my front door to grab the newspaper and found a bright yellow violation notice taped to my cabin door. The heading read, "Lakewood Hills HOA, Official Violation Notice," in bold red letters. My first thought was that someone had made a mistake. I'd lived here for 10 years without a single complaint. The violation was for my handmade wooden chairs on the front porch. Apparently, they were the wrong shade of brown according to HOA guidelines. The chairs had to be dark walnut brown, not light pine brown. I was being fined $150 for having furniture that was, and I quote, "aesthetically inconsistent with community standards." The notice was signed by Linda Morrison, HOA president, in sharp, aggressive handwriting that looked like it could cut glass. I called the HOA office immediately. "Hello, this is Jake Mitchell from Lakeside Drive. I got a violation notice this morning about my porch chairs, and I think there's been some confusion." The voice that answered was crisp, cold, and completely unsympathetic. "No confusion, Mr. Mitchell. I'm Linda Morrison, your new HOA president. Those chairs violate our updated community standards. You have 7 days to replace them or pay the fine." "But these chairs have been here for 3 years. I protested. "Nobody's ever complained before." Linda's laugh was sharp as broken glass. "Well, I'm complaining now. I have a responsibility to maintain property values in this community. Those chairs look like something from a garage sale." The line went quiet for a moment. Then she continued, "You know, Mr. Mitchell, I've noticed several other issues with your property that we'll need to discuss soon." That afternoon, I walked around the neighborhood to see if anyone else had received similar notices. What I discovered was disturbing. Sarah Chen, the 75-year-old widow 3 houses down, had been fined $200 for hanging her American flag on the wrong day. She said I could only display it on federal holidays. Sarah told me, her hands shaking as she held the citation. "But I've hung that flag every day for 20 years to honor my late husband." Tom Bradley, the engineer who lived across the street, had received a notice demanding he trim the oak tree in his front yard. She says it's blocking the sight lines of the community. Tom explained, pointing to the magnificent tree that had been there longer than any of us. That tree was one of the reasons I bought this house. Now she wants me to butcher it or face daily fines of $50 until I comply. The pattern became clear as I talked to more neighbors. Linda wasn't issuing violations randomly. She was targeting specific people, elderly residents, single homeowners, and anyone who seemed unlikely to fight back. Meanwhile, the Johnson family with their bright pink flamingo lawn ornaments, and the Smiths with their clearly oversized boat parked in their driveway, faced no citations whatsoever. It seemed money and connections mattered more than actual rule violations. But what really caught my attention was Linda herself. Every time I saw her around the neighborhood, she wore the same outfit, that red polo shirt with the HOA logo emblazoned across the chest, tight white shorts, and her wild, curly blonde hair that seemed to have a life of its own. She carried herself like she owned the place, strutting around with a clipboard and a smartphone, photographing people's homes like she was building cases against them. The breaking point came that Friday when Linda appeared at my door with what she called a mandatory improvement notice. The document demanded I repaint my entire cabin within 30 days or face a fine of $2,000 per month until completion. "Your cabin doesn't meet our updated aesthetic standards, Mr. Mitchell," she announced, standing on my porch like she owned it. "The color is too rustic for our community vision. Linda, I've lived here for 10 years. This cabin hasn't changed, and nobody's ever complained before." She smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "I'm the president now, Jake. I have a responsibility to elevate the quality of life in this community. Do you want to live in a slum?" Her words hit like a slap. "This is my home, Linda." Her smile turned into something colder. "No, this is managed property, and I represent the community's interests, not yours." That weekend, the neighborhood felt different. People who used to wave and chat now hurried past each other. The community message board, usually filled with friendly updates about yard sales and lost pets, fell silent. Everyone was walking on eggshells, afraid that any interaction might result in another citation. It felt like we were living under surveillance, like every flower we planted or chair we moved might trigger another violation notice. Sunday evening, I sat on my porch looking out at the lake, feeling like a stranger in my own home. For the first time in 10 years, I felt unwelcome in the place I loved most. Linda Morrison had created an atmosphere of fear and control that was suffocating the simple joy of neighborhood life. But I had no idea that the worst was yet to come, and that Linda's real plan was far more sinister than petty power trips and unreasonable fines. Monday morning, 6 a.m. sharp. The pounding on my door sounded like a SWAT team raid. I stumbled out of bed, threw on a robe, and opened the door to find Linda Morrison flanked by 2 men in expensive suits. Behind them stood a third man with a camera, already filming. Linda wore her trademark red polo and white shorts, but today her wild blonde hair was pulled back in a severe bun that made her look like a prison warden. "Good morning, Jake," Linda said with fake sweetness. "This is Attorney Johnson from Morrison Legal Associates and Mr. Davis, our property assessment specialist. We're here to conduct a mandatory property inspection under HOA emergency powers." I was still half asleep and completely confused. "Emergency powers? What emergency?" Attorney Johnson stepped forward with a thick folder. "Under Section 47B of your HOA agreement, we have the right to inspect any property that poses a potential threat to community standards." They walked straight into my cabin without waiting for permission. Linda directed them like a general commanding troops. Document the outdated flooring, the ceiling cracks, the windows that don't match the rest of the community. The assessment specialist photographed everything. My coffee mug on the counter, family photos on the walls, even the books on my shelves. "This property is clearly substandard for our community," Linda announced loud enough for the camera to capture. "Wait just a minute," I said, my anger finally overcoming my shock. "You can't just walk into my home and start taking pictures. I own this place." Linda turned to face me, and her smile was like ice. "Actually, Jake, you own the structure. The land beneath it, the area around it, and the rights associated with living here are subject to HOA management. And right now, we're determining whether you're in compliance with your residency requirements." That's when she revealed her real plan. Linda pulled out a manila envelope, thick with documents. "Jake, we've documented 47 separate violations over the past 3 months. Your property represents a clear threat to community property values. We're here to begin the process of residency review, which could result in the termination of your housing rights within this community." Termination of my housing rights? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Linda, you can't evict someone from a house they own." Her laugh was sharp and cruel. "We're not evicting you, Jake. We're exercising our right to maintain community standards. If you can't meet those standards, then perhaps this community isn't the right fit for you." But Linda wasn't finished with her psychological warfare. She opened another folder and spread photos across my kitchen table. "We've also documented your lifestyle choices that conflict with our family-friendly community standards. You've had overnight guests more than the allowed 3 times per month. You've played music after the 10 p.m. quiet hours. You've used outdoor lighting that creates glare for your neighbors." "You've been spying on me?" The words came out as a whisper. Linda shrugged. "I observe the community, Jake. It's my job to ensure everyone follows the rules. And you've been breaking a lot of rules." She leaned closer, her voice dropping to an almost intimate whisper. "The truth is, you don't fit the vision I have for this community. You're too independent, too set in your ways. This neighborhood needs people who understand the value of cooperation and compliance." The final blow came as they were preparing to leave. Linda stopped at my front door and turned back with that cold smile. "Oh, Jake, I almost forgot. I've sent a community notice to all your neighbors explaining the situation with your property. I thought they should understand why the HOA needs to make some difficult decisions. From now on, I think you'll find the neighborhood atmosphere a bit chilly." That afternoon, the isolation began immediately. Sarah Chen, who used to wave every morning, looked away when she saw me. Tom Bradley, who often stopped to chat about weekend fishing plans, hurried past my house without making eye contact. The neighborhood kids who used to play near my lakefront suddenly disappeared. It was like Linda had declared me persona non grata, and everyone was afraid to associate with the community pariah. By evening, I sat in my darkened cabin feeling completely alone. For the first time in my adult life, I felt genuinely afraid in my own home. Linda Morrison had done more than threaten my property. She'd isolated me from my community and made me feel like a criminal for existing. But somewhere in the back of my mind, a dangerous thought was forming. Linda had gone too far, and she was about to discover that she'd chosen the wrong person to bully. The morning after Linda's invasion, I didn't storm out demanding justice or call lawyers threatening lawsuits. Instead, I did something she probably never expected. I sat down and read every single page of my HOA agreement. All 127 pages that I'd mindlessly signed 10 years ago when I was just excited to own a lakeside cabin. Most people never read these documents, which is exactly what people like Linda count on. By page 34, I found something interesting. Section 23C clearly stated that any new regulations must be approved by 60% of residents through a formal vote. I grabbed a highlighter and started marking every rule Linda had imposed. Not one of them had been put to a community vote. Not the porch furniture color requirements, not the flag display restrictions, not the property improvement mandates. Linda Morrison had been making up rules as she went along. I drove to the county library and spent 6 hours researching HOA law in our state. What I discovered was fascinating and infuriating. HOAs have significant power, but that power has strict legal boundaries. They can't impose arbitrary fines, they can't inspect private property without proper cause, and they absolutely cannot threaten someone's residency without following specific due process procedures. Linda had violated at least a dozen state regulations in our single confrontation. But the most interesting discovery came when I researched Linda Morrison herself. Our county maintains public records of all HOA elections and leadership changes. According to the official documents, Linda's election as president was questionable at best. Only 12 residents out of 67 households had participated in the vote. The election notice had been posted for exactly the minimum required time, and the meeting had been scheduled during work hours when most people couldn't attend. That evening, I called Bill Hendricks, our former HOA president, who'd retired 2 years ago. "Jake, good to hear from you. I've been hearing some concerning things about Linda Morrison." Bill's voice carried the weight of someone who'd managed the community for 8 years without a single major controversy. "Bill, can you tell me about Linda's election? Something seems off about the whole process." "You're not wrong to be suspicious," Bill replied after a long pause. "That election was unusual. Linda appeared out of nowhere, claimed extensive experience with community management, and somehow convinced just enough people to vote for her. What bothered me was how well she knew HOA law for someone who'd just moved to the neighborhood. Almost like she'd done this before." "Done what before?" I asked. Bill was quiet for a moment. "Jake, I think Linda Morrison might be running some kind of operation. Have you looked at the HOA finances since she took over?" That question sent chills down my spine. "No, but I'd like to. Do you still have access to any records?" The next morning, Bill met me at a coffee shop 20 minutes outside our neighborhood. He brought a box of financial documents that painted a disturbing picture. During his 8 years as president, the HOA collected about $45,000 annually in dues, spending roughly $42,000 on maintenance and improvements. Simple, transparent, and accountable. Under Linda's 6-month leadership, the numbers were completely different. The HOA had collected $78,000 in just 6 months, with fines accounting for more than half that total. But the spending breakdown made no sense. Only $19,000 had gone to actual community maintenance, while $35,000 was listed as administrative consulting fees and legal compliance costs. The remaining money was supposedly being held for future community enhancement projects that nobody had heard about. "Bill, where's all this money going?" I asked, spreading the documents across the coffee shop table. "I have no idea, but I doubt it's going where it's supposed to. Linda's turned the HOA into a profit center, And I suspect she's not the only one benefiting. Bill leaned forward, lowering his voice. Jake, I think you need to be very careful. People who run these kinds of schemes don't usually stop at financial fraud. So that weekend, I decided to do some surveillance of my own. I followed Linda to an upscale restaurant across town, where she met with 3 men in expensive suits. Through the window, I could hear fragments of their conversation. Words like lakefront development potential, and clearing out unsuitable residents, and property values increasing 3-fold once we implement the resort conversion plan. Suddenly, everything made sense. Linda Morrison wasn't just a power-hungry HOA president. She was the advance agent for a development company that wanted to buy out our entire neighborhood and convert it into a luxury resort. Her strategy was to make life so miserable for existing residents that they'd sell their properties below market value rather than deal with her harassment. The fines, the arbitrary rules, the threats about residency termination, it was all designed to force people out. But Linda had made one crucial mistake. In all her research about our neighborhood, she'd missed one critical detail about my property, something that would completely destroy her plans and expose her scheme to everyone. The next phase of my counterattack would require patience, careful planning, and perfect timing. Linda Morrison thought she held all the cards, but she was about to learn that she'd been playing against someone who owned the entire deck. Tuesday morning, 7 a.m. sharp. I knocked on Linda Morrison's door wearing my best apologetic expression and carrying an envelope in my trembling hands. When she opened the door, her wild blonde curls were still messy from sleep, but she was already wearing that red HOA polo shirt. Her surprise was obvious. Jake, what are you doing here? Hello, Linda. I wanted to talk to you about what happened last week. I made my voice soft, defeated. I've been doing a lot of thinking, and I realize you were right about my cabin. It really doesn't fit with the community standards you're trying to maintain. Linda's eyes lit up with predatory satisfaction. Oh, and what brought about this change of heart? I couldn't sleep last night. I kept thinking about what you said, about being too independent and not fitting in. I handed her the envelope with shaking hands. This is a formal written apology to you and the HOA board, and this is my detailed plan for renovating my cabin within 60 days to meet all current standards. Linda read my letter, her smile growing wider with each paragraph. Well, Jake, I'm pleased to see you're finally understanding what it means to be a responsible community member. And she was practically glowing with triumph. Actually, Linda, there's something else I wanted to ask you. I made my voice humble, almost pleading. I'd like to join the HOA management committee. I want to learn how to be a better neighbor. The request clearly caught her off guard, but her ego was too inflated to see the trap. That's quite a change, Jake. Just last week you were fighting against everything I was trying to accomplish. I fed her more flattery. You're obviously a natural leader, Linda. I want to learn from someone who knows how to get things done. The praise worked perfectly. Linda straightened her shoulders and smiled like she'd just conquered a small nation. Thursday evening, Linda invited me to attend the HOA board meeting as an observer and potential committee member, and the meeting was held in her living room with just 4 people, Linda, myself, and 2 supporters from the neighborhood. What Linda didn't know was that I had a digital recorder in my pocket, carefully hidden and fully charged. Gentlemen, you can speak freely in front of Jake. He's finally seen the light about what we're trying to accomplish here. Linda's confidence was absolute. So, what's our timeline for the next phase of removals? asked one of her supporters. Sarah will be next, Linda replied without hesitation. She's too old, her house is outdated, and she definitely can't afford the improvement requirements we'll be implementing. What kind of improvement requirements? I asked, playing the role of an eager student. Linda's eyes gleamed with malicious pleasure. We're going to require full exterior renovations for any house over 15 years old. New roofing, new siding, new windows, professional landscaping. Most of these people can't afford $50,000 in improvements, so they'll have to sell. The conversation continued for 2 hours, and Linda revealed details that shocked even me. The development company had promised her a 15% commission on every property they acquired below market value. The HOA's legal expenses were actually payments to lawyers who specialized in forcing out difficult residents. Linda had been manipulating the community vote process by only notifying her supporters about important meetings. The beauty of the system, Linda explained, is that everything we're doing is technically legal. We're just using the HOA rules more creatively than most people expect. She turned to me with that cold smile. Jake, you're going to be a valuable addition to our team. You understand now that sometimes you have to be firm with people for their own good. Sunday evening, I sat in my cabin reviewing 3 hours of recorded conversations. Linda Morrison had handed me enough evidence to destroy her scheme, end her harassment campaign, and expose the development company's fraud. But I wasn't ready to play that card yet. I wanted Linda to feel completely secure in her victory before I pulled the rug out from under her. Monday morning, I sent anonymous emails to the county assessor's office, the state HOA regulatory board, and all 67 households in our neighborhood. The emails contained Linda's recorded confessions, documentation of financial irregularities, and evidence of illegal voting procedures. But I also included a request for a mandatory community meeting to discuss the future of our HOA and review current management practices. When that afternoon, Linda called me, her voice tight with barely controlled panic. Jake, did you hear about these ridiculous emails someone sent? They're making all kinds of false accusations about me. I kept my voice calm and supportive. I'm sure it's just a misunderstanding, Linda. You can explain everything at the community meeting. As I hung up the phone, I smiled for the first time in weeks. Linda Morrison had no idea that her reign of terror was about to end. Wednesday evening, 7 p.m. sharp. The community center was packed with 65 of our 67 households, the highest attendance in neighborhood history. Linda Morrison arrived wearing her most professional outfit, a dark blue blazer over her signature red polo shirt, her wild blonde curls tamed into what she probably thought looked authoritative. She carried a thick folder of papers and wore the confident smile of someone who believed she could talk her way out of anything. Good evening, everyone. I understand there are some concerns about HOA management that we need to address tonight. Linda's voice carried that familiar tone of condescending authority. I'm here to answer any questions and clear up what I'm sure are just simple misunderstandings about our community improvement initiatives. The first questions came from residents asking about the sudden increase in fines and new requirements that would cost thousands of dollars. Linda handled these with her usual mixture of fake sympathy and bureaucratic double talk. Then Bill Hendricks stood up from the back of the room. Linda, I'd like to ask about the financial management of our HOA funds. Can you explain why our administrative costs have increased by 400% in 6 months? Linda's confident smile flickered for just a moment. Bill, our enhanced management services require additional professional support. Everything we're doing is designed to maximize property values. Bill's voice carried the authority of someone who'd managed the community successfully for 8 years. "Can you show us the community votes that approved these new service contracts? Because according to our HOA charter, any expenditure over $5,000 requires resident approval." That's when I knew it was time. I stood up slowly from my seat in the middle of the room. "Actually, Bill, I think I can help answer that question." Every head in the room turned toward me, including Linda's. Her face went pale as she realized I was no longer playing the role of her converted supporter. "You see, Linda has been very generous in sharing information about her management philosophy. In fact, she's explained her entire strategy in great detail." I pulled out my phone and connected it to the community center's sound system. "I think everyone should hear exactly what Linda thinks about our neighborhood and our neighbors." Linda's recorded voice filled the room with perfect clarity. "Sarah will be next. She's too old, her house is outdated, and she definitely can't afford the improvement requirements we'll be implementing." The silence in the room was deafening. "The development company has promised me a 15% commission on every property they acquire below market value." Linda's voice continued from the speakers. Linda jumped to her feet, her face flushed red with panic and rage. "This is illegal! You can't record private conversations without consent!" But her protests were drowned out by gasps and angry murmurs as more of her confession played. "Then we'll make their lives so miserable they'll beg to leave. Daily fines, constant inspections, social isolation." But I wasn't finished yet. "That recording was just the beginning, Linda. Would you like to explain to everyone how you've been embezzling HOA funds?" I held up a folder thick with bank statements. "Actually, let me save everyone some time. Linda Morrison is not just a corrupt HOA president. She's the advance agent for a development company that wants to force everyone in this neighborhood to sell their homes below market value so they can build a luxury resort." The room erupted in angry voices, but I raised my hand for silence. "But here's the thing Linda didn't know when she chose me as her primary target." I pulled out a document I'd been saving for exactly this moment. "I don't just own my cabin. According to this property deed, I own the entire lake, the surrounding shoreline, and the land under our community parking lot." Linda's face went white as paper. "That's impossible." Her voice was barely a whisper. "Actually, it's very possible," I replied calmly. "When I bought my property 10 years ago, the seller included water rights and adjoining land use rights that were never transferred to the HOA. Legally speaking, everyone in this neighborhood has been using my private property for parking and lake access for the past decade." "Which means," I continued, looking directly at Linda, "you've been trying to evict me from property that I not only own, but that your entire development plan depends on accessing. Without my cooperation, your resort project is impossible." The vote to remove Linda Morrison from the HOA presidency was unanimous, except for 2 abstentions. Linda stood up slowly, her confident demeanor completely shattered. "You people have no idea what you're giving up. This neighborhood will never develop beyond a collection of old cabins." I replied quietly, "Linda, you have 48 hours to return every penny you've stolen from this community. If you don't, I'll be filing criminal charges for fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy." 2 weeks later, Linda Morrison left our neighborhood permanently. A month after that, we learned she'd been arrested in a neighboring county for running an identical scheme. The development company's plans collapsed when they realized they couldn't acquire the lake access rights that made the resort project profitable. When Bill asked me to consider becoming the new HOA president, I politely declined. I've seen what power can do to people, Bill. I just want to live peacefully in my cabin. Instead, we restructured the HOA with term limits, mandatory audits, and resident approval requirements for all major decisions. Sitting here now, a year later, watching Emma play by the lake, I realize that sometimes winning isn't the most important thing. What matters is making sure that bullies like Linda Morrison can't destroy people's lives and communities. Emma looks up from her sandcastle and waves. Mr. Jake, thank you for telling me the story. You did the right thing. I wave back and smile, but inside, I'm still wondering if there could have been another way. Because while justice was served, I know that the experience changed me in ways I'm still trying to understand.